to Space Odyssey, learn how our New York entrepreneurs, investors, academics, and enthusiasts are looking to commercialize the space industry. It's a big surprise to see so many people here on a Friday night. So, we're very happy to have you here. My name is Sidney Nakahodo, and I'm a founding member of NewSpace NYC, the organization that is devoted to promoting opportunities for commercialization of space in New York City area, and it's organizing this event. And we are very happy to have as partners Columbia Venture Capital Community. I don't know if Nikita Padel is here, but we'd like to thank her. Also, the Columbia Startup Lab for providing the venue, and Space Angels Network that has contributed with wine and tea. So help yourselves in the back. Before introducing our panelists, let me start asking a very important question. Who's a fan of Star Wars here? Who's a fan of Star Trek? Okay, so I think this is the right audience. With all the excitement around SpaceX and Virgin Galactic, reaching out to space no longer seems to be a distant thing. Our objective tonight is to share some of the thinking about how recent developments in the space industry are creating business opportunities for investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, and enthusiasts. Tonight, we're fortunate to have a very distinguished group of specialists leading the discussion. And I would kindly ask the audience to wait until I introduce all the speakers before giving a round of applause. We're proud to have Esther Dyson here, angel investor, philanthropist, commentator. Esther is a leading angel investor, philanthropist, and commentator focused on breakthrough efficacy in healthcare, government transparency, digital technology, biotech, and space. She recently founded HICA, which just launched its Way to Vaudeville contest of 5 places, 5 years, 5 metrics. She's a founding member of Space Angels Network and has invested in Export, Nanorex, Space Adventures, Icon Aircraft, and Mars One. She also sits on the board of 23andMe, Xcore, Meetup, and then the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on Fostering Entrepreneurship. Ian Fichtenbaum, here on my left, is the Vice President of AIAC, an aerospace conglomerate and buyout firm, and an advisor to Outernet, a global satellite media company. Previously, he was a VP to Near Earth, an investment bank dedicated to satellite, aerospace, and wireless industries. He is an alum of McGill and UBC, and also a proud alum of the International Space Industry University. And just today, Ian was sharing with us the big news that he became an advisor to the board of Nanorex. John Abrashkin, marketing, business and development at Honeybee Robotics. Honeybee Robotics, we're going to hear a lot about it. He's an experienced marketing and communication specialist with a passion for sustainable development and new technologies. For several years, he's provided PR, marketing strategy, and pipeline research for companies in the manufacturing and energy sectors. He brings a passion for building strong partnerships and developing business opportunities. He's expanding his knowledge of environmental engineering and Columbia's MS program while helping deploy improved robotic and automated systems to improve the way we live. And I'm proud to announce that as a CIPA faculty, or Columbia faculty, Columbia alum, I'm happy to have here in our panel, half of the members have some kind of affiliation with Columbia. And being here at the Columbia Startup Lab, it's very proud of Columbia's engagement with the space industry as well. That's Southern, Final Frontier Design. He's the CEO of Final Frontier Design, a space design firm specializing in high-tech materials and designs for commercial spaceflight. He has acted as principal investigator for 3 SBIRs contracts with NASA Johnson Space Center since 2011, developing Final Frontier Design's advanced pressure garment technology. Final Frontier Design is currently pursuing FAA and NASA human rating certification for its IVA suit. We also have Vivek, our good friend Vivek. doing work with business development at Team Indus. Vivek Mittal is responsible for business development at Team Indus, India's first space startup and leading contender at the Global Lunar X Prize. He has over 10 years of international experience in capital markets, consulting, training, business analysis, and project management. Previously, he worked at leading investment banks, hedge funds, consulting firms, and analytical software companies such as RBC, IBM, and Thomson Brothers. Last but not least, here to my right, Dick Rose, CEO of Rose Tech Ventures. Dick Rose is an Inc. 500 CEO, serial entrepreneur, and super angel investor in startup technology companies, and founder of New York Angels, an early-stage technology investment group. He's managing partner of the Rose Tech Ventures, a venture fund focused on internet-based businesses, and CEO of Gust, which operates a collaboration platform for early-stage angel investments. He's a founding member of the Space Angel Network that's supporting us tonight, and associate founder of Singularity University. He's also a co-founder of AREA, a real estate technology accelerator program here in New York. In 2014, David wrote a book, Angel Investing, the Gust Guide to Making Money.
Holding over here.
Considering investing in startups. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel. I would like to open our discussion tonight by asking a question to Esther and to Anil. And the first question is, what are your views about the recent developments in commercialization of space? Now we've been hearing a lot about Virgin Galactic, about SpaceX. To what extent we think that this is an industry that is already being developed, and what's the future that we can foresee for all of us? And ladies first.
So I'll start with a slightly longer perspective, but not a longer answer, which is, I started out in the PC business. I watched as mainframes got basically disrupted by PCs. And I think we're seeing the same thing happen in space. The mainframe rockets are getting disrupted by X4 and SpaceX and maybe Jeff Bezos, we don't know. And the other big trend also from the tech world is the internet being privatized. Once it was privatized, all this commercial energy was unleashed and amazing things happened. And, you have people from the old world saying, oh my God, a logo on a rocket, how disgusting. And other people saying, great, what a wonderful source of funding, we'll fund this rocket with marketing. And put logos on our spacesuits and whatever. So from my perspective, the thing that's happening now is the kind of disappearance of NASA from short-term space travel has left a huge market vacuum with some very weird politics, mostly built around labor forces that build stuff for NASA. I mean, if you want to understand people's politics, it's not really left or right or should the free market do stuff, but where do the traditional space companies, the cost plus big contractors, have an employment? And that kind of tells you more about where the politics are than anything else. At the same time, NewSpace itself, its biggest problem is a lack of good managers. I'm on the board of X-Corp. Jeff Grayson, our CEO, recently helped us lead the search for someone to replace him as CEO and liberate him as Chief Technology Officer so that he can do the fun stuff and finally have someone else deal with the boring stuff. And also, frankly, be a better manager of what is turning from an R&D shop to a business that has marketing and sales. We also married a Dutch company. That's the kind of transformation that some of these companies have yet to make. There's what I call sort of the billionaire project problem. Elon Musk brought in a real CEO, but there are a lot of billionaires who still would rather have these companies run by, I don't know, I'm not inside of them, but it's time to get a new generation of professional management. That doesn't mean they need MBAs, but yeah, these are no longer projects. They are companies, and the discipline that investors bring to companies like Xcore and SpaceX, I think, are needed throughout the industry.
So I'm going to answer the question in typical Wall Street fashion. One, I'm going to answer it the way I want to answer it, and two, I'm going to talk my book in the process. So the thing that you should be aware of about the space industry and use of space nowadays is just how much infrastructure we now have. I mean, if you consider everything that we now have, there's over 1,000 operational satellites of various sorts buzzing around in low Earth orbit or geosynchronous orbit or high orbits. We have, I counted at least 18 different spaceports in the United States alone. We have an amazing industrial base that needs to be disrupted, but it is still an amazing industrial base, churning out spacecraft of all sorts. Worldwide, there are about 100 launches done every year, and that number has been rising since 2004. And a lot of those rockets have spare space. And so, there's lots of places to put things. We have an operational space station that has 6 people on it, and there are 8 to 10 flights of various cargo or cruise ships that go there every single year. And so you have a logistics train that is there to be done. You have navigation and communications. A GPS system is just as good in low Earth orbit as it is in the middle of the desert. The TDRS system, which provides communications to the station, is just as good for any visiting vehicle as it is for the station, and you can use it to communicate on the ground anywhere you are, at least in low Earth orbit. So when it comes to doing something new in space, I'm not a big fan of building a whole new rocket or building a whole new space station just to do that. I like reusing parts wherever I can, or reusing somebody else's infrastructure. And 2 companies that I'm heavily involved with do just that. One, as you can see in my bio prominently, is Outernet. Outernet did something beautiful, which is said, how can we make a free global information service that gets around any kind of control of the internet? And the solution was to do one-way broadcast off of satellites. And there happens to be a heck of a lot of satellite capacity out there. And all you need really is the merging of media and tech know-how in order to turn that into a global information service. And I'm proud to say that we're well on our way to doing that, broadcasting over 3 continents, soon going to be global coverage. We just did an Indiegogo campaign where we sold well over 4,000 Lantern devices that anyone will be able to receive information, like shortwave radio. So and a lot of that was done off of existing satellites, and there will be more existing satellites. Eventually, Outernet will have its own satellites. So that's one case of using existing infrastructure. Nanorex is the other company that I'm heavily involved with. That saw something else that was part of the existing infrastructure, which is that NASA has to send its stuff up to the station, and it has access. It has a manifest aboard 5 or 6 different vehicles that go up to the station. So what NASA has done is create a logistics train, unlike anything that anyone has ever put together in the space industry. And Nanorex saw an opportunity that they can put things in the spare spots there and say, we can ride up on different vehicles to the station that's manned up, or personed up there, or whatever we're using nowadays. Staffed. That's a good one. I'm sorry. Staffed, 24/7, rise all the time, and you can bring things up and you can bring things down. And they've made a great business of sending experiments up to the station, deploying satellites off of it, going to soon be hanging things off the outside of the station. So, and again, that's a station that's up there and making good commercial use of this incredible asset and infrastructure that's already been built. And I'm proud to say I'm a shareholder of both these companies, and love to see what people can think of to use other parts of the space infrastructure.
Thanks, Ian. So from space to Earth, back to Earth. So I would like to ask David Vivek about the opportunities for startups in this context where the space industry is developing. And maybe we can start with David.
As you heard, I'm an associate founder of something called Singularity University. How many people here have heard of Singularity University? Okay, well, not exactly. Not exactly. Very many have heard of Singularity in this crowd. It's a lot of
How many have studied there?
Oh, good point. Are there any alums from Singularity you here? Oh, 1, 2. Okay, congratulations. So Singularity University is this postgraduate program out of the NASA Research Center in the Valley, which is based on the works of Ray Kurzweil, who wrote the book Singularity is Near, that is all about the exponential pace of change in technology. That if we ever had, we are no longer at a linear pace. We are at an exponential pace, which means it is growing like this, and we are now at about the knee of the curve. And if you think about exponentials, doubling every year or 2 years or 18 months or whatever it is. If you start really, really small, like 0.001, and you double it, you get 0.002. And the increment is only 0.001, so tiny you can't see it. The next increment is only 0.002, and then 0.004. You still can't see it. So if we were to graph this, it looks like a very, very, very slow rise over here. Then all of a sudden you get to 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 30, 64, and the curve begins to go like this. And so, in the beginning of human history, through the Industrial Revolution, effectively you were at this flat part of this what's called a power curve, and it was a very, very slowly rising one, and it seemed like it was flat. And then you sort of get to the Industrial Revolution, and it begins to accelerate through the 20th century. Spaceflight, people on the moon, amazing, and we're like at the knee of the curve, where things are all of a sudden you can see things are accelerating. But now instead of seeming flat, it seems like it's a linear acceleration, right? What has happened now is we've now got to the point where we're now, 2 gig, 4 gig, 8 gig, 16, 30, 64, terabyte, gigabyte, and a Google of information. And we are now at the point where this technological acceleration is now hitting almost a vertical line in a power curve. And that means that every single thing is changing. The idea of a new space industry or a meetup around this kind of stuff is so incomprehensible to anybody who was, in school back in the dark ages when was in school. That you could have your own rocket, that you could have a company that would try and put a rover on the moon or Mars. I mean, it's incomprehensible. But what has happened, this technological change, pace of change, has so affected everything that combined with the business changes that have been the result of this. It's because technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. Technology only exists as applied to the real world. I did a TED Talk at the Columbia Engineering School on Johann Gutenberg and his venture capitalists and angel investors, tracing all of Gutenberg's funding rounds and actually what happened. Gutenberg was a technology entrepreneur who invented the printing press, not out of some love of literature or whatever, to make friggin' money. I mean, he actually started as a goldsmith, and he had a business. He had one business that failed, and the other business that failed, and he said, "Okay, well, he invented this thing over here." And he said, and the only way we know anything about Gutenberg is from all of the lawsuits from all of his investors. But in any event, what you have seen, technology changes because it's applied to the business world. And the technology change that we have seen has disrupted every industry you can think of, from the airline industry, where virtually every major U.S. airline went bankrupt in the last couple of decades, to the taxi industry. The value of a taxi medallion in New York City has dropped to 25–30% in the last 12 months. When Uber goes from 0 to $40 billion within 4 years. I mean, you cannot name an industry that is not being completely disrupted. And so what technology has done is applied to space. It's taken what for the early days of space was this extraordinary institutional, large corporate, military, industrial complex, governmentally funded thing, and all of a sudden turned into like almost social networking. Hey, start a rocket, start a space business. And, I'll do racks, I'll do moons, I'll do rovers, I'll do suits, I'll do whatever. and it has opened it up. And NASA, with its move to the commercialization of space, recognizing this, and that was really pretty far-sighted, I think, of NASA. Partly out of duress, partly out of inspiration. The idea of taking things out of the federal government's law, and it's not just a giant, Lockheed whatever is there, but now, hey, we're going to go buy things commercially. Opened up the whole world. And so now and if you think about how complex the whole space thing is, to get somebody up and down and do whatever you do up there, all these component parts that used to be part of this one giant complex with all of these contractors top down is now happening bottom up around the world. And there are so many opportunities in every conceivable area, because space is now going to be like, with the internet and electricity, and you take it back. So, people here aren't in the electricity business, although everybody, here uses electricity. And, we're not necessarily in the internet business. Well, Esther was in the internet business. She was the first chairman of the internet, for those who didn't know. But everybody else is using the internet to do whatever you're going to do. You are in the internet-enabled business. And I think that ultimately you're going to see space, whether it's GPS or anything else, you're going to see in the space-enabled business. And this is an amazing time to get started.
Thank you. Talking about being a space company and putting a rover on the moon, that's no better way to continue this conversation with Vivek, who's representing Team Indus. And Team Indus is this company that's been building a rover to put in the moon, and is a developing country. So it's not only like the big players here in the US or in Russia or China. Like, you've seen the development of space industry all over the world.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. So I can speak a little bit about my own experience and how I got sucked into this aerospace world. Like Sydney introduced me, my primary experience has been with Wall Street and trading systems and risk management. And before that, I was dabbling in physics and PhD. So I always had a passion for this. But then I heard about these guys going to the moon last year, and I said, who are these people? And it turns out they're all my childhood friends. So I just called them up and I said, hey, you guys are going to the moon? And they're like, yeah, sure, you want to help? I said, fine. And the next day, so I thought it was extraordinary that these, some private company was going to the moon, and they're all being mocked and derided as these lunatics. And I said, no, man, I'm not one of those, and I want to be part of the gang. And so to cut the long story short, what was very obvious was that they're the right team. They're basically three investment bankers, right? And the Morgan Stanley guys, they were like, people from, with 10 years experience in hard technology, but been in the trenches and had run their companies and run them to the ground and failed. And so they were very seasoned professionals. So one, way of looking at aerospace is saying, is there anything really truly pure as aerospace? Or is it nothing but another application of physics and computer science? That's just because I'm an ex-physicist or physicist, still in heart, that I tend to, see the world in that sense. So, it's just an engineering applications in space, and as has been discussed and, very heavily underscored, there are multiple revolutions happening at this point in time. There's revolution in business. The governments are acutely aware, whether, large major countries like India, US, and Russia. And contrary to popular perception, India is not that backward. 1 billion people plus, and the space program is quite robust, and they have a very strong, plans, and both government as well as private players, and there's a lot of wealth floating around. So and I'm just promoting it. Both India and US are like very strongly aligned right now. A lot of business opportunities, and especially so within aerospace, space, and defense. And we can have many digressions and discussions around it. But the point is that these guys would practically nobody had an aerospace background except one of these who had an undergrad in aerospace, yet they participated in GLXP. They are going to the moon. Funding is $40 million, just to throw some numbers in perspective. And correct me if I'm wrong, but NASA is somewhere between $250 to $350 million for a moon project. Indian company, ISRO, will do it for $100 million, and we will do it for $40 million. Now try to beat that number. $40 million going to the moon. If somebody wants to, send something up there, talk to me, okay? So,
another story, but
Yeah. So, and then also, and I'll make a very sort of a bold commitment on the claim that having validated the astrodynamics, the orbital physics, the fact that we can do precision landing, and the navigation control, computer vision, what have you, like all the fancy, cool front end stuff, I can legitimately claim that it's purely a function of money. Therefore, if somebody gives me X amount of dollars, I can chart out a course for them to go to Mars or beyond. So in some ways, and I'm not being very dismissive, but the pure scientific aspects in some ways are secondary to pure financial aspects. I can go to Middle East and I believe there was some country there professing to, just boost up their aerospace department, like space exploration. So if somebody has $5 billion, then don't give it to, some established space company. I'll do it for 100th the cost, right? So it's like the Chinatown cost. I can take you to DC for $5 as opposed to $50, right? So anyways, I can just go on and on, but that just gives you some highlight of, my own experience and exposure and coming from Wall Street to see, for such dirt cheap, how can you accomplish such extraordinary goals? And a couple of comments about the culture there. People work harder than in this company and companies like this than in investment banks. They work every day, including Sunday. And the dropout rate is zero because, that's the only game in town, right? Either you have like India's NASA, which is this giant, the beast of an organization, or then you have these small startups. So it's like a cottage industry and people just love to work and then they work hard and they're getting algorithms and hardware and software and it's all lined up and the government wants to foster this ecosystem and they're very keen that their success. So that's it.
Thanks, Vivek. So there are startups all over the world, including here in New York. And we would like to hear from 2 startups. I don't know if you can call Honeybee Robotics as a startup anymore. And the question is, to what extent New York can become a hub for space startups? I would like to start with John.
So I'm coming at this from a little bit different perspective than maybe some of the other panelists. First, I'm not an aerospace engineer or an EE or an ME. And second, because Honeybee is, in some respects, part of the older system, maybe the more mature aerospace industry than the startup community is represented here. So Honeybee is about 32 years old. We are a New York company, founded on the Lower East Side. A few months ago, we moved to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, so we're neighbors with Ted and Final Frontier now. We build robotics for extreme environments. So that includes drills for Spirit and Opportunity back in 2003. We built the scoop for the Phoenix Mars lander. First drill to look inside rocks on Mars, first tool to sample the water on Mars. More recently, we contributed some systems to Curiosity, which is now tasting the organics from the rocks. And we're working on technologies for Mars 2020, and future sample return missions. So when you're talking about, a huge kind of decades-long project like the ones NASA pursues generally, there's not a whole lot of room for error, right? This is all driven by the scientists. First and foremost, they have certain missions that they want to fulfill. And then they expect the engineers to figure out how to accomplish those scientific goals. And when you have, a $1 billion plus mission, Curiosity level, everything is vetted and re-vetted, and there's so little appetite for risk that I'm a little bit jealous of some of the agile aspects. David's talking about, treating space almost like software. There's no barrier to entry. And that's a very new concept, I think, when you're talking about companies that have a real revenue stream right now rather than being angel or VC funded. But that's not to say that, this is all doom and gloom. I don't want to be a wet towel here. NASA and other agencies like DARPA still have a very important role, I think, in nurturing companies. Honeybee would not have gotten to where we are without things like SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grants from NASA, which give you 150 grand to develop a concept, and then anywhere over $1 million to prove that it works with a prototype. And that's essentially the way a small company can bootstrap itself if you don't have friends and family and you don't have a clear business model for what you're proposing. Likewise, DARPA and Defense Department are very important when it comes to developing new technologies. We're working with DARPA right now on the Phoenix program, which is designed to send a servicing satellite up to geo orbit and repurpose old defunct communication satellites by bolting on new communications and guidance and navigation and power modules, kind of making a Frankenstein satellite, if you will. And so the barrier to entry there is that you're working with big, somewhat risk-averse institutions. DARPA definitely likes to push the boundaries, but if you don't have a big academic background, it's very difficult to get the credibility. There's this chicken and egg problem where nobody wants to fly something until it's been flight validated. No one wants to do it first because these systems have so little margin for error. So, in that respect, I think New York probably, if it's going to be a hub for aerospace and private space, really needs to tap its academic institutions. And our moderator here and most of you guys are affiliated with Columbia or one of the universities in New York. You look at what's happening up in Cornell. Steve Squires was the PI on the Mars exploration rovers, and there's a beautiful kind of CubeSat industry going on up there. A lot of it is a really rigorous academic fundamental engineering background, plus this kind of scrappy startup will power themselves on Red Bull and ramen kind of mentality that you get from Silicon Valley. And I guess one other point that I'd like to make is space is not just sending up a satellite. There's a huge supply chain, and when you look at either NASA or private industry trying to send humans up or conduct science in space or go up to an asteroid for prospecting and space mining, there's this massive supply chain. You need radiation tolerant chips, you need textiles like Taken talked about, you need communications protocols, you need 3D printing technology. So there's a lot of niches to get involved in space, and I'd be surprised if somebody is solely dedicated to a technology for outer space that doesn't have some kind of Earth application or vice versa. And I think kind of bridging that gap would be very beneficial to young companies, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You look at how long things take to mature, even in a fast startup mentality, right? With Virgin Galactic promising year after year, commercial flights are coming in 12 months, and here we are, and they're not ready yet. So, having some kind of plan B or diversifying your market a little bit, I think can help, get this industry off the ground and, translate some of the academics that New York is great at into the space sector.
Thanks, John. So, Ted? Yeah, so I'd like to say first off that it's great to have Honeybee Robotics in New York City as sort of the big brother and mentor for a company like ours. And I think that John actually touched on a lot of points that I think were a case in point for. Nick and I started this company. Nick is my partner here in black in the front row there. Nick is an aerospace engineer, worked at Zvezda in Russia making spacesuits for 20 years. His first glove designs flew in space on Mir in 1988. I, on the other hand, I have an MFA in sculpture from Pratt. Background in costumes and props here in New York City. I've made costumes and props for a very long time, and so it's a kind of a unique mixture. But I've often said that we started this company sort of by accident. That Nick and I got involved in a NASA competition for citizen inventors, won some money and some recognition from NASA in that way. And NASA essentially said, oh, you should start a company, you should apply for SBIRs, we think we can contract with you. And my attitude was essentially, if NASA says do that, then I'll do that. There was never really a business plan to start this company. It was really more, we'll pursue this one particular contract and see where it leads. And it has been sort of a struggle for us over the last 5 years, and we'll have a 5-year anniversary here in June. I'm particularly proud of that landmark. But it's been a struggle for us to find that business plan, to find some commercial applications for what exactly it is that we're doing. We've transitioned from gloves, specifically EVA spacesuit gloves, starting off to full spacesuits and then marketing IVA spacesuits to all kinds of different companies. But the market for that is inherently limited. There's maximum, historically, companies set records building maybe a dozen spacesuits a year. So We've tried to push beyond the government contracting over the last couple of years. It's really been a focus of ours to kind of break the bust and boom cycle of government contracting and find commercial spin-offs for what it is that we're building. And more, I think we define ourselves as a garment company and a technical garment company, with the spacesuit as sort of a centerpiece to kind of inspire and drive some spin-off innovations that are applicable here on Earth. And in the sense that we're a technical garment company, I think it makes perfect sense to be here in New York City. I get a lot of questions from a lot of people, why in the hell are you in New York City if you're making stuff for space? You should be in Florida, you should be in Texas, you should be in California. Frankly, there's a lot of things in New York City. It's the biggest market for everything, right? And there's great talent in the garment industry here. There's facilities for people to build things here. There's a lot of infrastructure for delivery systems, and it's convenient to get to Houston and Florida and Spain and wherever else you need to get to. More and more, I don't think that the space industry is just in one place. So in that sense, it makes perfect sense. Also, this is where I'm from, and I founded the company, and so of course we're going to be in New York City.
So now I would like to invite our guest panelists to ask questions to the other guests. And I was wondering if someone would like to start.
Big mouth. I'll throw in a question to the panel, and then we got to start with Esther. And I wonder, given the scale of really big space missions, I mean, you heard 100 million, 200 million, 400 million bucks, and the typical startup, which is typically a $400 million startup, is this a continuum or sort of continuous spectrum of new space from the one person in a garage with a cat and no budget, then all the way up to creating, Virgin Galactic, or are there discrete bands? There's the startup team here. There's the mid-size that has to be funded by VCs. There's the big size that's got to be funded by contracts, and so on and so forth.
I think over time it's going to be pretty diverse. I mean, Nanorex, for example, is fundamentally an agent broker kind of outfit, as was Space Adventures. Those are low capital requirements. I mean, over time you build up stuff. Anytime you start building hardware or equipment, it ends up being more expensive. You need facilities. Building spacecraft is incredibly expensive, and then don't forget insurance and so forth. But the whole thing is to see this as an ecosystem, not just as build a spaceship. And the one thing that I thought Sydney missed in his intro was, this is great for investors and people who want to fly. It's also a real source of employment over time. And and you don't need to be an astronaut to be in the space business. You can actually be an accountant. And a part of our challenge, I think, as space is for people to understand that it's an exciting industry to work in, even if you're not Mark Kelly. And it's also an interesting business to be in terms of, again, the diversity of size and stage, and are you focused on intellectual property, or are you running a spaceport? And I can't resist. You're Russian, I assume, yeah? Because I think you probably designed my gloves, so I'd love to talk to you after.
For those who don't know, Esther is actually trained as a cosmonaut and spent 6 months in Star City in Russia, training as the backup cosmonaut to go to the space station. And for the record, I started my first new space company 27 years ago. My company actually created the RISC-MAC, which flew on STS-43. So.
Anybody with comments?
New satellite and space projects can come in various sorts. What's the big one? There are many risks involved in something new, a lot of which have to do with market risk, and that's really where things that require venture capital money come in. They start small, building something, and they build up. It is actually also possible, and it happens still regularly, to come in with a lot of money for things where there's a much more defined market. Satellite projects are still funded by various forms of institutional equity, export credit debt, high yield debt to put together a project. I mean, in the last several years, O3b, which is deploying a constellation in medium Earth orbit and is starting to provide service to much better internet access to cruise ships and other things. You know, they were funded by a series of funding events that ultimately was about 1.2 billion. You know, it started with some strategic investors, Google and Liberty and HSBC, but also got involved a lot of export credit debt and various other forms of financing. So that that was a case of a more defined market and project, and we could be seeing more of those. And then we'll also be seeing small venture-sized things that start in the garage, and we'll build up venture funding rounds over time.
So I have a question. So more recently we've heard some cases like Skybox that's building micro satellites that got from garage to funding in 4 years. More recently, another microsat company expired in 12 months, and from that came to serious A funding. So to what extent these are exceptions in the space industry, or they just reflect the current state of tech development and related startups? And then maybe David can.
Well, I would say that first of all, one of the challenges with anything in the entrepreneurial world, whether it's related to space or subsea or surface, is if you believe everything you read in the press, and if you level set by what you read in TechCrunch and whatever blog you're reading, you're gonna be way off base. I mean, the fact is that entrepreneurship is tough. How many people here think of themselves as entrepreneurs? Okay, this is a very large entrepreneurial kind of crowd. Being an entrepreneur is really tough. It's really nastily tough. It's brutally tough. And most entrepreneurs fail. That's a fact of life. The majority of the entrepreneurs fail. Frankly, a majority of the companies in which we invest fail. And angel investors invest in 1 out of every 40 companies they see. 39 to 1. And half of those fail. Even the best job we have, think of the 2% who we think are the winners, half of them fail. VC's invested 1 out of 400 companies. So every time you see all these things about, wait, is it possible that they went from the garage to Series A in 12 months? Well, yeah, but on the other hand, there were 2,000 other companies that didn't. So it's not that it is a unique thing, but those are actually the odds. So you will see more and more of that happening. Right now, because the exponential change in technology is making the cost of starting anything dropping so drastically that you can't literally by orders of magnitude every few years. You can now start things so cheaply that you don't need to depend on a venture capital fund of dropping $20 million into your pocket to start a company. Everybody here can start a company with open source stuff and free things and shared resources and whatever. And so therefore, that means that people like us, angel investors, not giant venture funds, but people investing out of our own pockets, can fund a whole lot of things. That's why there's this extraordinary boom in angel investing. Why I wrote a book available in Barnes & Noble and and so there's a lot of money now at the lower end. People investing small amounts of money. Part of the challenge is there is this almost required winnowing of the herd as you get up and getting to the Series A and the Series B and the Series C. There are not that many more companies now being funded at the higher levels, but a lot of companies being funded at the early stages. So ultimately, this is good for society. It's good for a competitive Darwinian, Adam Smith economy, because you're seeing a lot of creativity and a lot of experimentation happening at the lower ends, and then the best things win, no matter how far out they are. If it really works, if that play pays off, then society benefits. It's not, of course, so great for the entrepreneurs who were in the ones that didn't work, but that's the business.
Can I just, fundamentally, what's happening is the cost of failure is much less. You can get started and fail for much less money and often much quicker, and that is a way of winnowing things out. In the old days, it took much longer to fail, and so it took much longer to get started on the next new thing.
Thank you. So in the second half of our event, we'd like to open up the discussion for the audience. We're going to have a microphone here. It would like to circulate. And if you ask a question, please introduce yourself. Start here.
Hi. So I'm really thrilled. My name is Jason Sherwin. I'm a founder of a company here at the Columbia Startup Lab. It's called DeCervo. It does brain imaging for quick decisions. We've been working with athletes mostly. So I'm thrilled to see something like this, space panel here in New York City. I came to Columbia after my master's and PhD in aerospace engineering at Georgia Tech, and this is the last place I expected aerospace industry to show up. So I'm thrilled that this is going on here. But I've got a huge question about, and we've started to answer it about like what role New York could fulfill in the space industry, and the analogies to the internet are tantalizing. The growth of internet technology and the ability to fail quickly with software is tantalizing, but the cost of compiling a code is basically zero. The risk of compiling a code and testing if it works is basically zero. The cost and the risk of launching people or stuff into space is huge. And so I'm very curious about how, I understand that there are related industries to space flight that are important. EVA suits have been mentioned, robotic drills have been mentioned, but they're heavily dependent on the ability to quote unquote compile the code. In other words, launch it into space. So what I'm wondering is if there's any analogy to previous kinds of development of similar industries like flight in the beginning of the 20th century and the 19th century that could be used here to think about what are the principal things that we have to focus on in space industry. In other words, compiling the code, getting it up in a cheaper way. So if you guys have any thoughts on that, I'd appreciate it.
Look at the railroads. It's sort of like the railroads made anything possible in some sense. It was a very specific technology, trains and tracks and various kinds of fuel and stuff like that. 100 years from now, we'll be doing stuff on Mars, and we'll be really grateful for the 3D printers because you don't need to have all this stuff in inventory. Synthetic biology is going to be part of space. I'm not sure that, yes, spacecraft, but there's also, once you get into either on the moon or an asteroid, the lift required is much less. So the economics are going to change dramatically, and that's going to be really interesting. When space gets really exciting is when it's not Earth dependent, sort of the difference between the camper who takes everything in his tent and rolls it up with the movable tent, and the camper who just brings some cloth and sort of builds a place to live on the mountain. And we're still in the bring everything with you.
Right.
The big change is going to be when you start mining the moon and getting your fuel out of water, and you're out of the Earth's gravity hole, and you're eating synthetic biology stuff and breathing air that's created by new synthetic plants.
Esther mentioned railroads and aviation technology. I think those are all good analogies, in large part because there was such public investment. With the railroads, you had massive right-of-ways and land giveaways to a few select companies. And when you look at the big, and you guys can feel free to disagree with me here, but
Many which failed.
Yeah, and when you look at the big successes to date in private space flight, SpaceX is incredible. I don't want to say anything bad about them. They got a huge amount of their funding from the government. And there's been a lot of talk of how innovative they are as a private company, but Orbital Sciences was a private launch company before them. United Launch Alliance is a private company as a government contractor. So, we've been doing similar things, but I think like David says, the pace of innovation is increasing and the cost of entry and the cost of failure is decreasing. But still, if you're talking about living off the land like a trapper, who's going to be the first company or entity to invest in situ resource utilization? It's going to be a government. You have planetary resources or other companies looking to mine asteroids for precious metals or mine the moon for helium-free. But we still need the public funding to get to where this is routine and not boutique. And there's some things that probably just don't scale inherently, because even if there's quadrillions of dollars worth of platinum out there, logistically you're limited by how much you can get access to.
And if you get access to it, it'll get cheaper.
Yeah, that's a good
Right.
point.
But that's actually a great point, and that's why what NASA did with this whole privatization of space is so fascinating. Where government works best. I mean, I started my career in government working for Senator Patrick Moynihan here in New York as his urban affairs expert for a couple of years, and I was having a lot of fun. But I decided for 2 years that I really was an entrepreneur at heart, and I wanted to be in the private sector because that was the motive power, the energy, and the best government could do was to work at the edges. And in this particular case, what the governments are doing with things like NASA is to provide the contracts to say, okay, we're going to have a competition, and we'll contract with you to do this. And instead of being part of the existing sort of military industrial, space industrial supply chain, all in a NASA project, by seeding the first things out there to the private sector, combined with things like the X Prize and so on and so forth, you were building the capabilities of the industry itself to then go and do other things after.
May I disagree? I think you said it twice, and the first time I sort of winced, and the second time I grabbed the mic. I mean, I don't really see it as NASA creating the private sector. I see it as the private sector showing up and
Pounding on
NASA's door. And I was on NASA's advisory council for 2 years, and it was absolutely wonderful. I got thrown around and was paid to go visit all of NASA's facilities, meet with Charlie Holt and figure out and give them advice, which they were completely incapable of taking, because the only advice they can take is the advice that comes with dollars from Congress. And so I see it as responding on the one hand to Congress, on the other hand to a lot of startups.
No, so the answer is, of course, Esther is right, and as we
Yes, of course.
Esther is always right. But seriously, as people who are invested in the new world, the new economy, which is by definition disruptive, right? In whenever we deal with existing large companies, I mean, other than an occasional Apple or Amazon or something, which is capable of completely reinventing itself and pivoting as a large company, it is so difficult for any large commercial organization, let alone a government, which is even worse, and it's like pulling teeth. And so I was being slightly generous. But so whether it came from an inspiration by NASA, oh, let's privatize space, or whether it came from the private sector beating at its door and saying, do it, the result is now that you do have a good point, that there are some things that are very difficult to do. You can't do a start company, I'll build a space elevator, right? I'll go to the moon. You're not going to do that by yourself. There needs to be some, at this point early on, seed for that, and whether it's government funding, whether it's an X Prize or something. But what that does is that builds capability. And then you have people, then like now, we actually have extra space in there, and you can put it on it, or Space Adventures, which we're both involved with. You can rent a seat on the rocket there. And so once you have that, a little bit up front of coordination and governmental dollars helps to build an industry, and the industry itself then can begin.
It's in another part of the ecosystem. It's not the ecosystem. So, some question here in the back.
Yeah, hey, I'm Frank Jones. I'm with OB Mater, and my colleague here, Jamie, and I consider ourselves storytellers in order to help our brands win the hearts and minds of their audiences. And I've been to a bunch of space events since I moved to New York City 3 years ago, and I've asked it the same question to everybody, so I ask it of you. Seems like NewSpace has a bit of an echo chamber problem. It's a bunch of people talking to themselves about how cool it is. I mean, for example, everybody here raised their hand when they asked who is Singularity University. You ask a random passerby on the street what that is, no, they won't know the difference. So my question is, one, does NewSpace need the support of the public in order to succeed? And two, if it does, then what is the most important single-minded message that NewSpace companies can communicate to the public in order to popularize space exploration?
That's actually a great question.
Yep.
NewSpace shouldn't need the support of the, Vox Populi in order to happen. I mean, it does depend on what you're meaning by the public. You mean the voting public, the politically active public, the consumer public. There's a crowd, there's a community of people who call themselves space advocates, and it seems like the modus operandi of that crowd is that they promote space as much as possible to the public so that they will support more space spending politically, so that people have a greater budget for NASA, and so it's a roundabout way of influencing the big wallet that's been funding space up to now. If you look at it from a completely different perspective, there's at least 35 million people, households in this country that have satellite TV. There's at least 20 million subscribers to Sirius XM. Haven't checked their subscribers lately. People use images, people use their GPS. Schools can use nanoracks if they want to send an experiment up to space. This is the public and the consuming public. It doesn't need to be, mobilized. It could be, or if you're partial to Adam Smith, that it is motivated by the invisible hand. I've become much less of a big supporter of the advocacy route. They'll continue to exist because government spending will continue to exist. But if you make a product and you market it to the world and it supports an infrastructure, that infrastructure seems to have every right to exist, as long as, of course, it's not hurting anyone else.
I'd like to sort of point out that we were talking about an analogy for the space industry a little bit earlier there, and I think that it's important to think about space not as an end in itself, but the fact that the industries that develop around it to support it are actually important and do actually change things on Earth and change your life. And that's a big message that I think needs to get out about the space industry. I think a lot of people outside of this room are going to think, oh, it's cool to get on a rocket and fly into space. Why is that important to me? And there are myriad examples of why it is important, of why our cell phones work, and why why we have instant global communication, and to plant that seed of possibility of what can happen in the future with more space access, with more people going to space and in non-robotic missions to space. To think about the next manufacturing breakthrough that could happen in microgravity or in lunar gravity. Those sorts of possibilities of changing the world, I think, are to me the biggest message of this industry.
Gotcha.
Do you want? I don't want to get a.
So there was recently a lot of chlorine press and TV coverage of a guy went up in a balloon really, really high up to the edge of space and jumped out. Anybody know his name? What?
Felix. Alan Eustace beat him though. Red Bull had the
I
pilot.
know. That's the punchline. Of course, that's the most. That knows everything. But she's right. But so most of you said Felix Baumgartner, right? So in a highly televised thing, monster, talk about storytelling. Right? So storytelling, the entire world is transfixed as you go up the balloon with the giant logos on the side of the thing and everything else. Who knows that a Google vice president, 6 months later goes higher, jumps and beats the record, and just does it because he wanted to do it, right? So the number of people, if you ask people who broke the record for free fall, space parachute jump, I bet you, 80 to 90% of people on the street will take a Felix Baumgartner instead of Alan Eustace, right? And that's the power of storytelling and the power of advertising and marketing and how you.
So continue here. Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, so my name's Kevin with the Columbia Business School. And so my question is, what do you guys see as that source of, for the promise of wealth that's going to bring like the massive. You guys talk about how so far it's been mostly government funding. It's been like we wanted to beat the Soviets, 50 years ago that we really went into space. Like, what do you guys see as that promise? Like, with the America discovering America, the Europeans wanting to buy like spices from India. Like, what do you see in the future is that promise of wealth that's going to bring like more massive private dollars into investing into space exploration, things like that. And people mention like mining, but I'm failing to see how that's going to be, that single beacon of, almost promise.
Yeah, I'm talking too much, so I would shut up and ask my question. I'll take this one now. What is that?
The best way to make it happen would be an extraterrestrial invasion. But failing that, it's a combination of things. There may be one or two ships that came in search of spice, but then there were other things that happened. I mean, part of it is people want to go. Then there are rare minerals. There's the whole Bigelow, lives somewhere else. There's it's fundamentally sort of mining and new territory to do new things on. We can terraform Mars, and then by that time we can come back and terraform Earth. But and that genuinely is not a joke. It's always good to have a spare.
Well, I mean, there's some very near-term opportunities. You're seeing all this excitement about companies like Skybox, imaging and connectivity. So that's all about sending data back to the ground and helping connect everybody here. That's not a very satisfying answer though, because then all you're talking about is, a fleet of cheap, satellites in low and medium Earth orbit, and there's no real vision there beyond making day-to-day life better. Which, maybe that's enough. Maybe it doesn't have to be boldly visionary in terms of leaving footprints on another planet, but having gigabit download no matter where you are from a satellite. That'd be pretty awesome. Probably not going to get people all choked up, the way a lot of NASA missions do. When Curiosity landed, I was in a bar in the East Village, and it was like a Sunday night at 2 a.m., and the place was packed. And it was this really profound and emotional moment to see, the 7 minutes of terror end and confirmation that the robot had landed. And I mean, that's not even a manned mission, but the vision there is so grand that, I think it can really inspire people. And so you've got this dichotomy of very, kind of fun, money and near-term business opportunity versus the visionary, exploration-oriented vision. And I think we're almost talking about two separate industries when you break it down like that.
Let me take it. All right.
So in the time span between 50 years ago and 50 years from now, I would pose to you that actually this is not the best time to start a space business. The best time to start a space business would have been in the early 90s, because in the early 90s was the start of direct-to-home television, direct broadcast television, and the man who's probably made more money in space than anyone else is not Elon Musk. It's a man named Charlie Ergen, who founded EchoStar, which is also his Dish network. That is the most massive market in space today. It ranges somewhere in the $150 billion market is television. And it's the one actually still growing because it's growing in the emerging markets. When are we going to find something bigger than that? That's a good question. If we get to minerals and the asteroids, that plausibly gets you much bigger than that, but you have to go at great scale. You could have microgravity manufacturing, of course, that has to be at great scale. It is going to take a while to do something bigger than television.
My views are the following. Again, aerospace strictly is not an entity by itself. It is an extension of many other fields. For example, if you look at satellites, right, you can basically subdivide that into imaging and communication, right? There are already many players in it. So one way to look at it is that, the space-based business is augmenting and adding efficiency to the human economy, as opposed to discovering US accidentally while looking for spice in India. It's not like you'll go to some nearby planet and asteroids and meet altogether new aliens with whom you can, trade whatever, oranges or anything, right? So it's not going to substantially do anything, fundamentally new, but it will add a huge amount of efficiencies. And those who are more engineering and mathematically inclined and financially, there's very exciting projects, a whole host of new technologies and projects and things that you can do. So from that perspective, it's a very exciting area.
I'd just like to say also, I have kind of utopian stars in my eyes, and I really do believe that it is something like finding a new world to enable access to space. There really are enormous resources out there, and that's really what people are looking for in the new world is resources, not just spices, but gold and chocolate and all kinds of new things, right? And I think there's a lot out there that we don't know about, and there's a lot that can enable energy, for instance. Energy manufacturing space could change the world, right? And I think that's part of the reason that I'm motivated in this industry.
So let me ask the audience.
I have a different view on this whole thing.
That's great. That's a great debate. So let me ask the audience, who's involved in a space-related project here in this room?
Wow.
That's pretty impressive.
Whoa, that's really
So I would like to ask some of you to raise your hands and to describe your project very briefly and to share the challenge that you're facing or to ask for advice. So maybe Luigi. Okay.
Sure. Single me out. Hello, my name is Luigi. I'm here with Lyle, and last summer we both interned over at NAS Goddard. And while our time there, we worked on a small CubeSat. It's called Dellinger. So that will launch at the end of this year, not the next year. At that time, we found out that there's this challenge coming out. It's called the Keep Quest. So we've been, running around back and forth. The Keep Quest is a challenge that if you do well on these ground tournaments, you will get a free ride to the moon. So your CubeSat will go to the moon, and you have to basically try to orbit the moon. So basically, you have to try to capture it, right? And then the other aspect is that you have to communicate. Who can send the most amount of data, highest burst rate? And this is a lot for a small CubeSat. These things you just can't buy off the shelf. Yes, all the hardware for low Earth orbit you can just buy off the shelf, but hardware really isn't the way to win in terms of forming a company. So we're trying to do this, dedicate our two or 3 years of our life, and then maybe hopefully we can demonstrate that this works and build some kind of business model where we can basically either provide some type of feature where we can help the rovers navigate on the moon, or we can also relay data from the moon. And yeah, so if you have some questions about that, you can ask Kyle and I afterwards. So, thanks.
And I saw some hints, like maybe Achal and Jingwei can share your ideas about what you're doing related to space.
Okay. Yeah, you guys call me in. I had a normal pulse rate there.
So this is actually a small project as part of the NewSpace NYC. So the reason why a lot of us came together to start this organization was because of a project. We decided to make satellite receivers which could get satellite signal from any satellite, like Google and all these big companies are now Facebook heavily investing in getting internet across places where it's not available right now, especially the developing countries. And a big part what they are using for this purpose is satellite communication. So the project that we are trying to work on is trying to build these receivers which are very cheap and can easily be sent to these developing nations. And they can use satellite signals to get internet access. So that is one small project that we've started working on.
I see some other hands here. Somebody would like to share? Yeah, please.
My name is Kurt. I'm the operations financial officer for a company called Weston Inc. here in the lab. We provide services and software for multi-objective optimization of additive manufacturing. This kind of stuff is heard a lot in aerospace, but is also kind of trending across multiple industries. We've decided to kind of beachhead in aerospace as well, and was kind of interested in hearing from you guys how much R&D you're doing in creating components or complex components of low volume to make them more efficient, stronger, lighter, so they cost less, can be made in space, so on and so forth.
So let's give the opportunity for the panel to take this. I mean, Honeybee Robotics for a little while was going by Honeybee Robotics Spacecraft Mechanisms Corporation, because we would go to a prime like Ball Aerospace or Lockheed, and they'd say, "Honeybee, I thought you guys made robots. You make space hardware." So about a third of our business is in building stuff for spacecraft that moves. So twist capsules and slip rings, control moment gyroscopes, solar array deployment systems. It's like gimbals, everything but the communications and the solar panels themselves in the bus. And I think that's a huge industry. It's really conservative. That's like the classic flight heritage problem, where you need somebody to take a bet so that you can prove that this thing works in orbit, no matter how much you lab test it and validate it on a bio table or in a thermal vacuum chamber. So yeah, that's a huge part of our business.
I'd like to touch on that too. Yep. Final Frontier Design announced a space act agreement with NASA back in December to essentially human rate our suit for low Earth orbit, and we're especially proud of that fact. We have good companies, SpaceX, ULA, ATK. But one of the big challenges for that is the materials and processes certifications. We have a number of components on our suit that are 3D printed. 3D printing makes an incredible amount of sense for us because we're anthropomorphically shaped pressure vessel that's made in very low volume, right? And we're constantly sort of updating and improving prototypes. So we actually have a strategic partnership with the Marshall Spaceflight Facility down in Huntsville, Alabama. They have a manufacturing center there that is working on certifying through MAPDIS, NASA's Materials and Processes Database, individual components that have been additively manufactured. But it's a struggle that we're running into. Right now, we're essentially defining a universe through the Space Act Agreement. What envelope are we operating in? What standards do we go by? There are no standards for additively manufactured components according to NASA, and it's something that we essentially have to be the guinea pig for and write the book. And it seems like at Marshall, they're really interested in Connell and like very sort of rocket engine oriented things, whereas we're interested in nylon and stainless steel and more sort of regular everyday components that make sense commercially in low volumes. But yeah, that's I think a huge opportunity and really changes the way we think about design, but also poses some huge problems. And as John said, who's going to take that bet and make it fly?
So other space projects here? Okay, yeah, Chris?
As Cindy said, my name is Chris. I'm a CSL entrepreneur here. We make web authentication software that uses computer vision and deep learning and combat very bad cyber threats and sort of work on concept phishing, things like that. And you might say, what does this have to do with space exploration? And as we've really touched upon, this is really kind of an area of a lot of cross-pollination. There's a lot of different factors that are involved, lots of different technologies that intersect in just the right way. And a few months ago, Vivek's Team Indus was actually in town with their CEO and their engineers. They were describing some of the technical challenges that they were facing. And one of the things they are in fact looking to procure is an autonomous landing software system. So this is something whereby you have this sort of moon orbiter that's traveling at 2 kilometers per second. It needs to go from that to a soft landing on the surface. And in that process, it needs to navigate away from hazardous things on the lunar surface like craters, boulders, and there are video cameras attached to the descender. And based on that data, you want to be able to autonomously, use your thruster controls and avoid those kinds of problems. So this is basically a potential project that we're looking for computer vision developers, animation developers to generate and render images of the descent process. That's just kind of a cool thing. I think you guys are scheduled to launch, what, in 2016?
Oh, that's right. Originally it was December 15, but the XPRIZE itself was shifted by a year, and that's not the first time they've done it, given the size and magnitude. So what it implies is that even our rocket schedule has been shifted back, and within a margin of a few months.
Yeah, so that should give you some sense of the timeline of this kind of a project. So you should talk to one of us if you or friends that you have might be interested in this project. The second thing I'm kind of working on with like 5% of my time, but I'm not working on my company, is actually just a robotics class project with my friend Marcelo over there. And this is in the area of small sat imaging, which is a very popular topic we've also talked about. And we're really trying to validate some of the new ideas that are coming out in the small sat conferences. Some papers that Skybox has recently published about accomplishing stereo imaging from small satellites, which means you can not just get real-time image data, but also like real-time point cloud data about specific points on the Earth's surface. And you can also dive deep into like super high resolution, way beneath the sub-meter resolution that's currently at. So it's just a couple of things we're working on. Marcel and I are working on some early simulations, and we're really looking specifically what kind of control infrastructure small satellites can support, like gyroscopic or terrestrial propulsion, things like that, that can accomplish these stereo vision kinds of tasks.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, saw some hands here. Yeah, here in the back.
Hey, Sydney?
Yeah, sure.
Can I just respond to that? So Chris, I just have a question for you. So given that you might be able to accomplish these high resolution imagery architecture, have you guys given any thoughts to the legal restrictions? Because the government would be quite wary, right, that you're crossing certain thresholds and making people uncomfortable.
I think if we were ever to approach market with this, we'd inevitably have to go through that process. I mean, if you look at Skybox and Planet Labs, for example, the limits to the resolutions that they can get are not technical, they are political, or they're regulatory based. We're really more at the stage of just validating this technology. And, if and when we do bump up against those legal barriers, we would have those conversations, and there'd be very specific purposes where it could be permitted. And it's also a proof of concept for other really cool applications like imaging, other extraterrestrial bodies like the moon or the Martian surface that's super, super high resolution. It's like, imagine getting the best maps that exist, better than anything NASA or the Indian government has produced in the past. This would also be a validation for that kind of technology application.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so here in the back.
Yeah, hi, my name is Chris Craddock. I'm the founder of RocketStar. And we're developing an altitude compensating upgraded aerospike engine that runs on water that hopefully will be getting you guys back to space.
Awesome. So you see a lot of space companies here. Nobody expected that we had so many space startups. So I think it's a good sign that the time is now. Right? So David, I think we got something to comment before. back to panel.
So the point I was going to make was there were two really interesting questions. So you had rather had the question of what stories, how does storytelling fit into this? And then you had a question was what big profit motive is driving things? What's the spice route that's going to drive people to go to space? And I would say I have a very different approach to the question than you do. I look here at entrepreneurs, right? And so speaking as somebody who's a lifelong entrepreneur and an angel investor, and somebody who's invested in over 100 companies and lives in this world, the power of entrepreneurship and excitement, and whether you call it the capitalist market or just the entrepreneurial drive, that's like saying, what's the lure of the internet? Or first, computers. Well, nobody would want computers in their own home, right? Well, okay, yes, they do. And the internet, well, that can be used for email. Well, yeah, and a whole hell of a lot more. So the existence of the internet has look at all of the entrepreneurs in the world who are doing things that are enabled by the internet now. It's the individual human entrepreneurial creative spirit that is envisioning things that are doing this. And so I think you made a good point about there are two different. There's the visionary thing, which is exploration and adventure, and go to the moon and jump down space, and that's wonderful, and that's great. That's one part of human existence. But the other part, this whole new space that we're investing in doing, that's an entrepreneurial world. That's not so much driven by the guy, I want to be an astronaut or I want to reach the stars. That's great and that's wonderful. And that's a legitimate part of life. But that's not what's driving new space. What's driving new space is this entrepreneurial energy, which is really extraordinary. And space, whether you're talking about Earth imaging or resource from planetary resources, or colonizing new things, or terraforming Earth, or being able to deliver energy from the sun, down a thing. Or there are so many things that if you're an entrepreneur, you can look up to the stars, look at space, and say, boy, I see a million different possibilities here for creating businesses, creating value, and I think that's what's driving new space.
Excellent. Very good. It's always very encouraging to hear like this positive tone from someone who's seen so much in the industry. In addition to entrepreneurs, I think there are some investors here. I hope this panel and this discussion is also giving opportunity to understand a little bit more about the space industry. Just wondering if, for those of you who are more on the investment side, would like to ask questions or would like to make comments.
Anybody here got money?
Yeah, are there any?
My name is Dan Simon. I work for a company that does primarily aircraft leasing, so we buy commercial airplanes, lease them to airlines. You might not know this, United, Virgin doesn't own their aircraft, they lease them for the most part. My question for you guys is, and Ian just sort of touched on this, what is the market for space? So the revenue seems to come from satellites and from defense stuff, sort of NASA tenders, NASA contracts, things like that. How big is that market versus how big is the sort of satellite imaging telecommunications market, either in percentage terms or in dollar terms? And do you see that as a steadily growing market? Does it go up and down in waves? I mean, how does that sort of look like financially?
Let me preface by meandering. Space is an odd thing to say you're investing in because space is mostly emptiness. There's not much there, and the distances between anything is pretty considerable. Space has a number of properties that are amenable to business. The biggest one is that it's the high ground, which means you can put a satellite there and image it, or bounce communications off of the thing, or you can use it as a beacon. And that's been the biggest revenue generator in all sorts of different ways. You want me to break down the subsectors of the industry, the fixed satellite, the mobile satellite, and the television, and the imaging. There's reports that will do that. I mean, you can go way down to the fine grain on that. That's been one part. Another property of space is that it's very prestigious to be in it for some reason. And so governments have been amenable to spending a lot of money doing a whole lot of programs. Some of it is actually in service of the first part, either mostly for their military and intelligence purposes, but some of it is just to send stuff to different places. So we could say we did and explore stuff, which is its own motivations. And so that supports national civil programs, and that's been sort of like that. And you can see the breakdown by country, by activity, by countries starting up that. A third property of, there's a few other properties of space that I'd like to see more revenue generation come out of. One is the absence of gravity. I've always maintained that if the absence of gravity was like an oven or a refrigerator or a vacuum chamber, it would be in a whole bunch of industrial processes, just like the last three. The only problem is that getting to a zero gravity environment requires usually, or at least a persistent microgravity environment, usually involves going to low Earth orbit and going through 3 years of bureaucracy to do that. NanoRacks, and here I am talking up my book again, allows you to do that in much less time, 9 months or less, and get to that box, that industrial process eventually on the space station. I'd like to see more revenue generation come out of that. Then there's the personal experiential thing. You know, the suborbital trips, the orbital trips. Orbital trips have been going for between $20 and $50 million a person. There have been 8 trips so far. I'm hoping with the new vehicle, the commercial vehicles coming online, that we're going to see considerably more people in the next decade, hopefully double-digit numbers of people in the next decade. If we're really good, it'll be triple digits. And that'll be the start of another industry. And, you know, there's the other property of space is that there's other planets there. I don't have any idea what the revenue line for that property of space is going to be, but if you have a 200-year projection, it should be in there in some form or another. Make it part of your DCF analysis.
Wondering, someone got that on? Questions from investors? Yes.
Not investors, but looking for money. To my question.
Sure.
So hypothetically, if somebody wants to start a SpaceX in Europe, let's say outside of ASA, where would one look for money? Like between 6 and
That's not enough.
There's one company that I consider almost a competitor to SpaceX in Europe. It's a company. I don't own shares in this one, so I'm not talking about booking it. There's a company called Reaction Engines, which I find fascinating in the UK. I think it's actually been around since the late 80s. It comes out of a project from the mid 80s. Their technology is they use a hybrid rocket jet engine that has, and each engine has 3,000 kilometers worth of tubing to do what it does. So they're working on they've been working on the engine. The basis of it is the Skylon, space plane. It's gotten a variety of tranches of money from both private investors and from the European Space Agency and from the UK government. The amount of money that they've put together over the years probably amounts to somewhere in the range of 100 to 150 million. Most of that's has come from the British government in the last few years. They've finally been able to get some traction. It's as you can tell, since they've been around since the late 80s, it's been an enormous slog for them. I don't know anyone else other than the incumbent Arianespace, which gets its money from the governments of Europe and from the European Space Agency, that's trying to build large rockets in Europe. There's a company in Spain that's trying to do smaller rockets enabled by balloons. I don't know I actually think they have two funding sources, like pension plan funding sources, but I have no idea where else they find money.
Swiss Space Systems, that's very.
Oh, that's Swiss Space Systems too. Those are mostly a plane.
At the moment, but they say suborbital, they say orbital.
Yeah.
Who knows, right?
What about Firefly, that new company?
Firefly, they're not in Europe.
No, right, I was thinking about Firefly, so not.
Yeah.
Never mind, I got confused.
It was pretty good. So we still have 15, 20 minutes. Then I would like now to move and think about the future, like the road ahead. And 1 year from now, when we organize this event again, hopefully with an audience as engaged as we have here tonight, what important new trend will we be talking about in that conference? And looking even further, what's your counterintuitive, half crazy prediction about next 5 to 10 years in the space industry? And this is a question for everyone here in the panel. The first question is about the short-term trend, what we're going to be talking about next year. This year, we're talking about imaging, internet satellites. This is probably we're going to be talking next year or something else. And then taking 5 to 10 years from now.
I can tell you what people were talking about at the satellite conference in DC, which I was at last week. A lot of sort of talk about low Earth orbit constellations, particularly OneWeb, which is the Qualcomm Virgin Group backed group that's trying to launch about 650 satellites. There's also the SpaceX apparently planned constellation. Elon wants to put 4,000 satellites into low Earth orbit. There's another plan called LeoSat, which is only looking at 120, which is still also going to be the largest constellation yet deployed. Maybe Planet Labs will exceed them because they're just sending up lots of little ones all the time. So that's what we're talking about this year, and it's really a this year phenomenon because these things have been announced in the last few months. What we'll be talking about next year, probably a lot of the same thing. If SpaceX is closer to reusability, then we'll be talking about that. I may have some things that I'm working on that we maybe all be talking about.
Human spaceflight?
Probably not next year. What would we be talking about in the long term?
Yep.
Oh, definitely the things I'm working on.
With luck, next year, we'll be talking about the first flights of Virgin Galactic and X-Core. Sir Brightman will be going up and coming down. I mean, this is more on the consumer market side. 10, 20 years, I really hope we're talking about Mars. I might be able to retire sometime towards the end of that, and I want some other people there getting it ready for me. It's a great retirement place because you weigh only 30.
But that's actually fascinating. So last week was the TED conference in Vancouver. I was at TED. And Stephen Petranek did a whole thing about the future of space, where things are going. And he did the whole, Mars, and then, he's joking here, it's going to happen within, 15, 20 years. And I was fascinated because the TED audience, there was an enormous amount of skepticism. I would have thought a lot, this is the whole space crowd, and we all think, we're going to Mars. Of course we're going to be in Mars in 20 years. But that has not reached out to the full population yet, which I think is very interesting. And I think that disconnect is going to be breached. I think we're eventually going to have a lot more people thinking like us, given this whole exponential change in technology, that you want to be there, and before Esther retires, so that you can come visit Esther's home on Mars for the weekend.
No, not for the weekend, sorry.
Sorry, long term.
I mean, the way to go to Mars is to retire. It's not to go back and forth.
If anybody hasn't read the book, The Martian, it's an amazing book. A book called The Martian. Yeah, gotta read it. Gotta read it.
So I gotta say, I think I know exactly what we're going to be talking
That was
about.
really good. The movie's coming out too. Matt Damon. Yeah. Matt Damon.
Oh, cool.
Starring in it.
I don't know what we'll talk about in 5 to 10 years, but I think I know exactly what we'll talk about next year is how poorly humans do in microgravity. Just today, we sent up an astronaut and a cosmonaut to be up in space for a year. And I think that it's going to be really horrible for the human body, and that'll be a really interesting conversation on how we counteract that.
Do you know how much the astronauts exercise in the bloody space station? It's like, 6 hours a day, 4 hours? What is it? 2 hours, 3 hours? Every day? Push the little.
So,
They should.
They should. Well, I'm going to go to Esther's place and do it.
So, point number one that I'd like to make is that, I'm just revalidating what Ian, just indicated about this huge surge towards small satellites and constellations and, less than 10 kilograms to 50 plus to 100 plus and a whole host of players coming in. And one must also bear in mind that, there are different economies. So there's a US mindset and way of doing business. And from what I understand, within India itself, there's a lot of interest in small satellites, and the new young startup firms are bubbling up. So our company, Team Indus, is apparently not the first one to make an attempt at small satellites. It's already another firm, and the average age there is, I think, 21 or something. So people are, thinking very well advanced in terms of engineering this, getting launch contracts, and having agreements and pushing this forward. Point number two is more of a question, and to the point that you had raised initially about and long-term horizon in terms of cost structures, how they will pan out over years, decades, and primarily in terms of launch contracts. So launch is the key determinant of the space business. I mean, that eats the share, and then the key reason is you have to defeat the gravity. So it's your basic physics, your high school freshman physics, and you have to defeat the Earth, and then you have to generate a certain amount of critical velocity and to get out. And therefore, there's a critical amount. Like, I think the cheapest rocket on this planet is the Indian rocket, It's a robust, it's a workhorse, and it costs about $20 million. But I mean, the questions are, unlike the microelectronics miniaturization on account of Moore's law and quantum physics and so on and so forth, whereby you can project and make a claim that, well, the costs will keep declining first in this time horizon. But on the other hand, when you look at propulsion systems, right, chemical thrusters and rockets and Newtonian gravity, I mean, I'm not sure you can say, okay, well, 100 years from now, this curve is just going to keep going down. I mean, I'm putting on my physicist hat and trying to see where is this confidence that there'll be a sharp decline in costs in terms of launch, right? So
Reusability does a lot to lower costs.
Yep. Get some final thoughts. I'll keep this brief, but we've been hearing all about skybox and swarms of small satellites. We haven't talked at all about drones, and I think in the next year or two, there's just going to be this embarrassment of riches when it comes to data and connectivity options, whether you're talking about imaging or wireless communication. And a lot of these satellite companies are going to have to compete with, a relatively low-cost, unmanned, solar-powered plane that can loiter at, 100 miles an hour up in the stratosphere, rather than you stick along at 18,000 miles an hour and have a lifetime of 24 months. So I think there's just going to be more and more competition, and that's probably beneficial for end users. A little longer term, probably international developments. The word taikonaut is probably going to be as common as cosmonaut now, and that's good for everyone.
Yeah, so before working up, just a few announcements. NewSpace NYC is hosting a few events here. Some of you have already joined these events every other Friday, pretty much. And the idea is to, in a smaller setting, discuss things like, we had Team Windows presenting their project. We had X-Core recently. We had Michael Najar, who's a German artist who's doing groundbreaking art related to space. So if you're interested, please visit our website, newspacenyc.nyc, and sign up for our announcements. And I would like to ask our NewSpace NYC members to raise your hands, because then if you have any questions, just please reach out to our colleagues and talk about your interests, and maybe we'll find ways to help you connect with investors, connect with potential partners in academia, or even people who might be interested in the things that you might be doing. So we're here to help. So finally, we'd like to thank our panelists for this great discussion, and hope to see you again in the next event. Thank you very much. There's some still wine and cheese there, and then we're gonna mingle up here, so feel free to socialize and
I enjoyed your conference. I'm also a former physicist.
No, you're an aerospace PhD.
Yeah, well, I was physics undergrad at Chicago, and I did aerospace afterwards. But I mean, sounds like we're on the same page, Challenger.
Working emergency response. Yeah, I look at it as a student planner. We need to know in our hazmat equipment.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things like some environmental gloves, seems like a really obvious
You wanted to go out outer space? I could take you to some New York City basements that will seem like they're out of the world. So I created a mobile aggregation combination of regular services. It's just a one-stop application, communicating emergency response. We call it a 4W walk where when right now it's very starting still with people that doesn't almost or kind of reached a power outage or a gas leak just like it happened. So yeah, I think it's very easy. We're running the pilot now with Jersey City. We're seeking investors. I'm working on this place. I'm a graduate from Columbia. There it is. That's the second where you are. It's not settled. And diverse financial. Diverse community. No English, no language necessary. Just icon. And it changes the ecosystem. Yeah. We're saving money. We're saving lives. You can interact. Everyday services. So you have a high use. So it's just kind of sitting there while now we send those notifications. But internally for response, I mean, I have several classrooms in their community, and that's always been like a big talk, like equipment is heavy, it's cumbersome.
How are you going to deal with an iPad when you have gloves on, right? Like, it's a basic question.
Basic stuff like just like a zipper that just makes like when it gets hot, and I just run my gloves and everything. We could go on and on.
We've talked about this. We've had a couple of FDM in the studio, and they're general answers, so I just take off my gloves when I need to do something. It's like, holy shit, like that's worse than the worst kind of glove. It's no glove at all.
That's right, yeah. Well, us, that's not even enough. We need KP gloves. This is like to get so it's just, it would be nice if it was like
we want ideas. I get the cars, and we cover our phone data, and then it's going up great. So it's really for me, that's I'm really passionate about a lot of Victoria's Secret things. That's fun and all that, but it feels like there's something pretty fun. Actually, that's very good. That's what it was like. I know it's a challenge when you're trying to develop the space quality, and then also with other industry, so you get to partners. It's much bureaucracy, and I don't think that makes sense. And NCA is like, industry part of that has this fingertips are integrated but not like your glove. Precision. It's big like
we measure like CO2 level.
Everybody needs that. Make sure your gloves is a cool thing.
I'm actually writing an article on singularity on precisely this project. I started a physics crowdfunding site. Just physics is space. And our goal is to do this is stuff that's been researched today in 20 years.
This is one of the things that keeps me up at night. It's like, what can I manufacture in my undergraduate? That isn't usually what they're constantly developing beyond like very specific like biogenetic research.
So I sure do. In my car, if you ever like
If you haven't talked to you about that, try to email or you can put them over to the Navy.
Well, by the way,